This is Nightly Business Report with Tyler Matheson and Susie Garrett.
Deal breaks down. Sprint shares plummet after ending its bid for T-Mobile. Now the company has to find a new growth the hard way.
And record settlement. Bank of America and the Justice Department are reportedly close to a deal that would cost the bank $17 billion to settle mortgage-related misconduct.
Fight of a lifetime. What happens when unapproved drugs are the only hope for very ill patients? Tonight, we start our three-part series, Desperate Measures. All that and more tonight on Nightly Business Report for Wednesday, August 6th. Good evening, everyone. I'm Sue Herrera, filling in tonight for Susie Garrett.
And I'm Tyler Matheson. Welcome, everybody. Well, it was a beautiful summer day on Wall Street, but not for two stocks whose prices had been plumped up by deal talk. Last night, we told you about 21st Century Fox withdrawing its $80 billion bid to acquire Time Warner. Time Warner's stock fell nearly 13% today. More on that one in a moment. Today, we learned that Sprint has hung up on its pursuit of rival wireless carrier T-Mobile. The big reason? Unlikely regulatory approval to merge the nation's number 3 and number 4 telecoms. Shares of Sprint got slammed today, down 19%. Shares of T-Mobile fell too, but a smaller, more manageable 8%. So what's next for Sprint and for T-Mobile? Morgan Brennan takes a look.
The mobile wars continue, taking an unexpected turn that could leave Sprint at a disadvantage. Sources confirm that the wireless carrier has abandoned its much-anticipated bid for smaller rival T-Mobile. The communications industry has been expecting the two to announce a merger in a deal that would have valued T-Mobile at $32 billion.
This is very difficult news for Sprint. Sprint has all but abandoned almost any plan B other than merging with T-Mobile. So now they're going to have to go back, lick their wounds, and come up with an operating strategy that likely means a lot more capital spending and lower prices for consumers. And those are going to do real damage to Sprint's income statement.
That pushed shares of Sprint down by double digits. Over the past several years, the company's poured billions into a network upgrade, a process that's caused poor service and with it, the loss of millions of monthly subscribers. Now those upgrades are almost finished. But Sprint has argued that to better compete with bigger rivals Verizon and AT&T, it needs scale, something it had hoped to get with T-Mobile. However, regulators have repeatedly voiced opposition, and that's what caused Sprint to finally scrap its plans. But what about T-Mobile?
T-Mobile's probably going to be fine. T-Mobile has right now a ton of brand momentum. Its prices are already low, so it's gaining market share. And it's got a lot of cost reductions ahead of it because of a merger that it did a year or so ago with Metro PCS. And so its income statement and its balance sheet keep getting stronger as time goes on.
French telecom Iliad has put an offer in front of T-Mobile for a majority stake as well. And experts say this could present a buying opportunity for satellite TV provider Dish Network, a company that also faces increased competition as AT&T buys its rival DirecTV and Comcast merges with Time Warner Cable. As for Sprint, the company is also welcoming a new CEO, Marcelo Claure, whose Brightstar cell phone distributor was purchased by Sprint's owner SoftBank last year. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Morgan Brennan.
More now on that abandoned bid by 21st Century Fox to acquire media giant Time Warner. Shares of Time Warner took a tumble today, falling nearly 13%, despite reporting a 10% jump in earnings last quarter, thanks to HBO and its Game of Thrones series. After the bell, the latest quarterly earnings at 21st Century Fox were better than expected, thanks to its film studio and cable TV networks. Fox earned 42 cents a share, easily topping estimates. Revenues of more than $8 billion also beat Wall Street estimates. The stock was initially flat after hours, but then it moved higher. Julia Borston was listening into the conference calls. Julia, welcome. Rupert Murdoch was on that call, and what, if anything, did he say about the withdrawn bid for Time Warner?
Well, so he addressed the issues straight off the bat and said the decision to withdraw that bid for Time Warner came down to two fundamental issues. One was the fact that Time Warner's management and board was not willing to sit down and negotiate. And two, it was the reaction of Fox's stock and the fact that Fox's stock continued to decline on that news. So he was really looking to do what made most sense for shareholders, he said.
What is next for Rupert Murdoch? Is there any possibility that he might come back either later this year or into 2015 with another bid for Time Warner?
Well, Tyler, he also addressed those questions. There's certainly been a lot of rumors flying that he doesn't really mean that he's dropping the bid. But he said we are resolute in the decision to move on. And then Fox president and COO Chase Carey, he echoed that. And he said, this is it. We're really moving on. And really indicating that they're not planning on going back. Now, on the earnings call, which just wrapped up, there were a lot of questions about what else they might want to buy or what their outlook is for M&A in general. And they said the reason they were interested in Time Warner in the first place was because scale is important, but they stressed that they don't need to make an acquisition.
What about Time Warner? What are you hearing about what they may do next? Do they have to do anything?
Well, right now, I think the most important thing for Time Warner to do is execute on the plan that CEO Jeff Bewkes laid out, because they really have to convince investors that it makes sense for them to go forward as a standalone company and not do a merger.
Julia, thank you very much. Julia Borston in Los Angeles.
On Wall Street today, stocks end a choppy trading session with modest gains, despite jitters after NATO confirmed that Russia has 20,000 combat-ready troops on the eastern border of Ukraine. The major averages shrugged off a sell-off in Europe and ended the day higher, but not by much. The Dow added 13 points, the Nasdaq higher by 2, and the S&P was up by 0.03 of 1 point.
Bank of America is reportedly close to a deal with the Justice Department to settle allegations of mortgage-related misconduct in the run-up to the financial crisis. And the price tag of the settlement could be a record. Kayla Tausche has the details.
Bank of America is near a multi-billion-dollar settlement over allegations it underwrote fraudulent mortgages leading up to and during the financial crisis. A settlement, which reports have pegged between $16 and $17 billion, would cap more than a year-long investigation, which Bank of America first disclosed in August of last year, disclosing an investigation by the Department of Justice and relevant state attorneys general over these mortgages, as other banks at that point, too, were in the spotlight. J.P. Morgan settling for $13 billion, Citi settling for multiples of billions of dollars as well, and now Bank of America in recent weeks has seen its talks with the government ratchet up. Though we don't have an agreement on paper just yet, that number could move around, but it would be a positive development for a bank that has had more than $50 billion in settlements and in payments over legal issues since the financial crisis. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Kayla Tausche in New York.
But there was some good news for Bank of America today. It was allowed to raise its quarterly dividend for the first time in 7 years, from 1 cent per share to 5 cents per share. That's after the Federal Reserve okayed the lender's revised capital plan, the third one it submitted this year.
Russian President Vladimir Putin is retaliating against the U.S. and other countries for imposing those tough economic sanctions over the conflict in Ukraine. Russia is now limiting or outright banning the import of many types of food and other agricultural products from those very same nations.
And China is cracking down on a number of Western companies for what it calls monopolistic behavior. But is Beijing just pressuring foreign manufacturers that have become too attractive to its Chinese consumers at the expense of Chinese firms? Eunice Yoon has more from Beijing.
China says Chrysler and Audi have been found guilty of monopolistic behavior and that the two car makers, among others, will be punished. The car industry is the latest to face government scrutiny as Beijing steps up efforts to enforce its anti-monopoly law. And that's put many car players on edge. The investigations are widespread. The regulators are targeting pricing of cars and spare parts, but it's unclear what the government means by monopolistic behavior or what the punishment is going to be. In the past several days, some car makers have dropped prices. Chrysler cut the price of its top-of-the-line Grand Cherokee by $10,500. It, along with Audi, slashed prices for spare parts. Daimler, the owner of Mercedes-Benz, is also now under investigation. It dropped prices for parts by about 15%. The authorities say the investigations are to protect Chinese consumers and bring companies into line with China's anti-monopoly laws. However, they come when many foreign companies have come under government pressure, feel unfairly targeted, and complain about the lack of transparency in these investigations.
For Nightly Business Report, I'm Eunice Yoon in Beijing.
Still ahead, trucking companies with safety violations that are easily able to wipe their dirty records clean. Eamon Javers has the story in the final part of our series, Collision Course. A sizable jump in domestic energy production is a big reason the U.S. trade deficit was lower than expected in June, and why crude prices are now at a 6-month low. But how can the U.S. safeguard all that energy? Jackie DeAngelis takes a look at one company's efforts to protect existing oil pipelines and make sure future projects are secure.
As the U.S. strives towards energy independence, the debate on how to transport crude safely is heating up. The focus on pipelines, how to make them more efficient, and how to limit accidents. Enbridge Energy Partners is one company leading the way, protecting its 50,000 miles of pipe using smart pigs. Launched into pipes, smart pigs find stress, cracks, and corrosion, alerting the company to issues before they arise.
Smart tools are our primary source for being able to go in and really understand what's going on with the pipeline.
Recent rail accidents involving flammable Bakken crude and a barge accident in March that deposited nearly 170,000 gallons of crude into the Houston Ship Channel are prompting industry experts to believe that pipelines are the safest way to move high volumes of crude.
I think if you look at the safety record of crude oil pipelines versus alternates, pipelines come out on top.
TransCanada's Keystone Pipeline project has also raised the debate. While the project would bring jobs to the U.S. and transport roughly 800,000 barrels of Canadian crude a day, environmentalists worry about leaks and explosions.
But pipeline proponents like Enbridge, which has moved 13 billion barrels of crude through its pipes over the last decade and is the largest importer of crude into the U.S., say safety is paramount, and they're working on it every day.
I could talk about our safety record in terms of those 13 billion barrels and the 99.9993%, but we don't talk a lot about that because we're really focused on the very small percentage. And no leak is acceptable.
Enbridge has spent nearly $4.5 billion on pipeline integrity just over the last couple of years. Wall Street likes pipeline companies too. Expansion is projected, and the group on average pays distributions of roughly 5%. Analysts say El Paso Partners, Kinder Morgan, Cheniere Energy, and Plains All American are just some of the stocks to watch. One thing everyone agrees on, crude will get where it needs to go, and pipelines will grow. How quickly is the question. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Jackie DeAngelis in Plummer, Minnesota.
Chesapeake Energy's second quarter profit slides nearly 70%, and that's where we begin tonight's market focus. The natural gas producer said lower prices put pressure on its results. The company, however, raised the midpoint of its production outlook for 2014 as more wells are connected to pipelines. Shares rose slightly, closing at $26.19. Ralph Lauren also saw its earnings fall as the retailer continued to invest in expansion efforts. The company gave guidance for the current quarter, saying it expects revenue to climb by as much as 6%, led by retail growth. That sent shares slightly higher to $156.88. Cognizant disappointed investors when that company announced it's expecting its slowest full-year revenue growth in the company's 20-year history. The IT services provider blamed delays in booking revenue from some large deals. The company's board did expand its repurchase program by $500 million, but shares tumbled nonetheless, down more than 12.5% to $43.67.
Viacom missed earnings estimates on both the top and bottom lines. The media company says its results were impacted partly by fewer new movies. The Comedy Central owner saw a moderate gain in its cable network revenue, but not enough to offset its film slump. The stock dropped nearly 2% to $80.31. Mondelez cut its 2014 sales target. The reason? Price hikes to offset rising commodity costs have turned off some retailers and consumers, damping demand. For the second quarter, the Oreo cookie maker saw its earnings rise as lower expenses offset declining revenue. But the shares fell nonetheless to $35.70. And shares of Walgreens, speaking of falling, tumbled today after the retailer slashed its 2016 profit targets. That added to investors' disappointment that the company won't move its headquarters to Europe for a tax advantage. We told you about that last night. The stock, 14% lower at $59.21.
A Russian hacker ring has stolen 1.2 billion usernames and password combinations. The New York Times says a Milwaukee-based firm called Hold Security uncovered that online breach, reporting the data was stolen from more than 400,000 websites. It's the largest known collection of stolen internet credentials. Hold Security, however, did not divulge the names of the victimized websites.
All this week, we've told you about how long-haul, big-rig trucks are increasingly on a collision course with U.S. drivers. In tonight's final installment of our three-part series, we take a look at trucking companies with serious safety violations that were forced to shut down, only to start up again under different names. Eamon Javers has the story.
Kelly Linhart, a truck driver who had over 15 years of experience and was the father of 4, was doing a routine truck inspection in September 2008 when he was hit and killed by an oncoming truck veering out of its lane.
Fell asleep by his own admission, ran off the road and ran over Kelly Linhart, dragging him to a horrible death.
Michael Leeserman is a plaintiff's attorney who specializes in truck cases. He represented the Linhart family and deposed Daniel Clary, the driver of the out-of-control truck.
You admit that you were driving under the influence of methamphetamine at the time of this crash, right?
I'm in my system, yeah.
Clary pled guilty to criminally negligent homicide and driving under the influence of intoxicants. He was sentenced to 40 months. In his deposition, Clary admitted to prior convictions for meth and marijuana. Who would let a driver with that record behind the wheel of an 80,000-pound truck? This man, Forrest Rangeloff.
Range Transportation did have some safety rating concerns.
Yes. Could never pass.
Leeserman says Rangeloff's company was nothing more than a chameleon carrier, a trucking company that shuts down and refiles with the Department of Transportation under a new name to avoid liability or government fines. Forrest's company, Range Transportation, had a conditional safety rating from the government. That's a warning to companies that they need to improve. Even after the Linhart crash, though, he was able to file for a new company that he called Range It Express.
I see too often, in this case and other cases that I handle, where the owner of the company simply closes down, refuses to pay the fines, and starts another company.
Forrest Rangeloff said Clary passed a drug test and told him before the accident that he didn't use drugs.
There are legitimate reasons to have separate companies, absolutely. But when we're talking about a chameleon carrier, we're talking about a truck company that is so unsafe, the government fines it. Instead of paying the fine, the owners close it down and start another company.
Forrest Rangeloff isn't alone. In just 1 year in 2010, the Government Accountability Office found over 1,100 new trucking company applications that appeared to be changing their name to clear their troubled records. And GAO found 18% of suspected chameleons were involved in severe crashes, triple the rate for non-chameleon carriers. Ann Farrow is the outgoing head of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration. GAO found in 2010 that her agency only checked 2% of new applicants for being potential chameleons. Now the GAO and Farrow say more is being done.
So what we have done is created a system we call vetting. Are there patterns in this company's operation that show that they actually are sharing the address with a company we've shut down before?
So what's the penalty for a chameleon company?
Well, there are a series of different penalties. The highest penalty is we shut them down. We say very clearly, you are not authorized to operate.
As for the Linhart family, they were able to arrange a confidential settlement with the company that hired Forrest Rangeloff in the first place. Forrest Rangeloff was dropped from the lawsuit. For Nightly Business Report, I'm Eamon Javers.
If you'd like to read more about Eamon's investigation into the trucking industry, head to our website, nbr.com.
Still ahead, when unapproved drugs are the last hope for very ill patients. We'll bring you the first of our three-part series, Desperate Measures, next.
Tonight we bring you the first in a three-part series called Desperate Measures, about the challenges patients and their families face when treatment options run out and the only thing left to try is experimental drugs. We begin tonight with a story of patients who appeal to drug makers for so-called compassionate use of their drugs. Meg Terrell has the story.
Go. Natalie Trawler is determined to succeed, whether on the soccer field or training her dog, Missy.
Good girl.
Now she's tackling the challenge of her life. 2 years ago, Natalie was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer, alveolar soft part sarcoma.
I started getting these really bad headaches, and they were a lot worse than normal. And so my mom took me to the doctor one day, and they were doing some x-rays and stuff, and eventually found that I had a large tumor in my chest.
The cancer had already spread to Natalie's brain. Since then, she's been through 10 surgeries, radiation, and multiple medicines, some with difficult side effects.
None of them really seem to have a good effect on my cancer.
Natalie's doctors at Oregon Health and Science University's Knight Cancer Institute have identified a new class of drugs they think may work for her, immunotherapies. They harness the immune system to fight cancer. But they're not yet approved, and Natalie doesn't qualify for ongoing clinical trials. She's 3 years too young.
We were hoping maybe there could be an age exception made or some sort of provision so that she could try, some of medicine's best ideas. We just kept finding that door was closed.
The Trawlers are in a position countless others have been before. They're out of options among approved drugs or those available through clinical trials, and Natalie's running out of time. So they turn to compassionate use, a system designed to act as a last resort.
And compassionate use is a way for people to get access to promising new therapies outside of the context of a clinical trial.
Brian Drucker, director of OHSU's Knight Cancer Institute, has adopted Natalie's cause.
But with some promising new therapies, we may exclude somebody for sometimes a relatively trivial reason. In Natalie's case, it's her age. And if we understand that she has the right characteristics or we think she might respond, we might want to provide access to her for that medication.
Patients applying for compassionate use need the support of their physician, an okay from the FDA, and a drug maker willing to supply the medicine. That's where Natalie and many others have gotten stuck. The Trawlers and their doctors have asked Genentech, Bristol Myers, and Merck for access to their immunotherapies. They've all said no.
The companies say a number of issues play into their decisions, including having enough supply of the experimental medicines for clinical trials and how thoroughly the drugs have been tested.
But pressure is mounting on drug makers, not just for Natalie, but for many other patients and their families that turn to social media with their pleas. But it's a complicated issue.
2 or 3 out of hundreds have seen any benefit. Sometimes people say to me, but what's the difference? If you're dying, why not take the shot? New drugs can kill you faster. New drugs can make you sicker.
Natalie's dad says they understand the risks.
What we do know for sure is we know exactly what Natalie's disease does when it's unchecked. And it's excruciating pain, it's things that limit her, and with some of these new medicines, actually the risk is less than other medicines in the past.
And Meg Terrell is with us now. Meg, these raise important ethical questions, business questions. What are the limits of compassionate use? When does it make sense? When does it not?
Right, so talking with the FDA and talking with Dr. Drucker, who we just featured in the package, they really say you do need the support of your physician to try to interact with the drug makers. And there needs to be a scientific rationale behind asking for a specific drug. It can't be a shot in the dark. There has to be some reason to think it might work. And in Natalie Trawler's case, she did test positive for a biomarker for these immunotherapy drugs. And so they think there's a good scientific reason. And also there has to be reason to think that the potential benefit outweighs the potential risk.
Yeah.
So it's a tough situation.
Now, the 3 companies that said no, what are the odds? Do they ever change their mind? Can you reapply or appeal to them again?
Well, the family has certainly been continuing to try to do that and talking to them all the time. It's rare that we've seen that happen, but there was a case. Josh Hardy was a 7-year-old boy, is an 8-year-old boy now, was asking for an experimental antiviral drug from a company named Chimerix, and they had a really strong social media campaign, and that's another element to this story. Patients are getting a much stronger voice through social media.
So social pressure on the companies.
Yeah, and that helped Chimerix reach an agreement with the FDA to start a new clinical trial. They enrolled Josh as the first patient.
But as you mentioned earlier, there are ethical considerations here. There were a lot of other patients who'd asked for that drug, and they didn't get it before. So there are these questions of inequity in the system.
You mentioned some of the reasons why a company might say no. In other words, that they don't have enough supply to supply to the clinical trial. What are some of the other reasons, and do the companies have to tell you why they rejected your request?
There aren't a lot of guidelines over how you communicate about this, and that's one of the issues in the system, people tell me. But the other reasons they say no, it's really all about getting drugs to market for the broadest population of patients as fast as possible, and the companies say you have to do that through clinical trials. And we take a much closer look at this in our next package on this, which runs tomorrow night.
Yeah, what do you have tomorrow night? Remind us.
It's a look at why the companies say no. So I talked to a lot of companies about how they make these decisions. And these are real people at drug companies, and they're making heart-wrenching decisions about this.
Yeah, I would not envy them being in that position and having to say no to a beautiful young girl like that. On the other hand, there are mortality issues if she takes the drug and something happens, and that leads to liability issues as well.
That's absolutely right.
Meg, we look forward to Chapter 2 tomorrow.
Thank you.
Meg Terrell. And to read more about Meg's Desperate Measures series for us, you can go to our website, nbr.com. And that will do it for us tonight on Nightly Business Report. I'm Sue Herrera, in for Susie. Thanks for joining us.
And I'm Tyler Mathis. And thanks from me as well. Have a great evening, everybody. We'll see you back here tomorrow night. I'm Tyler Mathisen with a Nightly Business Report news brief. Bank of America is reportedly close to a record $17 billion deal to settle a Justice Department probe over the sale of shoddy mortgage-backed securities in the run-up to the financial crisis. Shares of Sprint tumbled 19% after it abandoned its pursuit of rival T-Mobile, fearing it wouldn't get regulatory approval. On Wall Street, stocks basically end flat. The Dow added 13 points, the Nasdaq higher by 2, and the S&P a tiny fraction of a point higher. Walgreens paying $5 billion for the rest of the UK-based drug chain Alliance Boots, and plans to keep its headquarters right here in the USA. Russia retaliating against the West over tough economic sanctions by limiting or banning the import of some food and other agricultural products. And tune in to Nightly Business Report here on your public television station.